You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Athan Hristodulu.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Athan Hristodulu. It is January 14th, 2022, and today we are doing our game preview for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Philadelphia Eagles Super Wildcard Weekend matchup we have coming up in just a few days. It is the 1 o'clock game on Sunday, so make sure if you have not already, you hit that like button down below. You subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the game previews. Check out the other ones that we've already gone over. I've done the Raiders and Bengals. I've done the Patriots and Bills. I did the Cowboys and 49ers yesterday, and I obviously will be doing the other two games remaining after this one as well, leading into the weekend. So make sure you're not missing out on that. So let's talk ourselves some Philadelphia Eagles and some Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There's a lot to go into this game. They've already matched up once already in Week 6 earlier in the year with Tampa Bay taking the win there. So we have a very interesting situation where a team, they're not even division rivals, are going up against each other again, similar to how the Bengals and the Raiders, non-divisional opponents, matching up together again. Then you also have something like the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Chiefs. It's very weird. We're getting a lot of rematches in this playoff bracket here, and I'm loving it because we get teams that are getting second shots at teams that either took them down or maybe whacked them pretty aggressively. I mean, when you look at what the Chiefs and Steelers had that game, this one was a lot tighter. It got very close in the end as the Eagles were starting to make a comeback and unfortunately just kind of ran out of time. So a lot of interesting ripples with the playoffs, and this one is, of course, no doubt one of those. So let's talk about some X factors and some interesting things about these teams, some players that I think are really going to stand out and make a difference in this game here. For the Philadelphia Eagles, the defense, man, there's a lot to like about their defense. Darius Slay has been an excellent corner for them all year long. I always thought it was kind of interesting when the Lions let him go and sent him off to Philadelphia. I was very surprised at that because Darius Slay has always been a really good cornerback, and he had another really strong year this year as well, doing an excellent job out in coverage. Then you have guys like Javon Hargrave, Josh Sweet, excellent guys on the D-line that are able to cause pressure, wreak some havoc on quarterbacks, and get some things done. A guy like Miles Sanders, their running back, who, despite the fact that he has dealt with a handful of injuries, when he has the opportunity to, can run wild on some defenses in this very, very run-heavy offense. But the biggest X factor in this game, and the one that I think is going to ultimately decide how well the Eagles do in this one, has got to be their quarterback, Jalen Hurts. I really think that the Eagles' fate in this game rests on his shoulders. While this is a very run-first team, and they have a very large committee of rushers on that unit on offense, how Jalen Hurts fares in this game will decide how things play out. If you remember the first time these two teams played, things were a little iffy in the first half, couple of interceptions for Hurts, but that second half, things got a lot better for him. A couple of rushing touchdowns kept the game fairly close. At one point, they missed a field goal, so realistically, the final score could have been 28-25, or maybe a much different situation had they made that field goal. Who knows what would have happened, how the teams would have handled the remaining time that was left in the game. But I think with Jalen Hurts, He needs to play better. He needs to protect the football a little bit better than he did the first time these two teams matched up with each other. Keep doing what you're doing on the ground, doing it so effective, but you need to go up against what has been a very aggressive Tampa Bay Buccaneers team, very effective at getting after the quarterback. If he can protect the football, avoid those interceptions, and still dominate the ground the way he does, and even if he's just throwing for like 200 some odd yards and just not getting those turnovers, with one of those picks ending up with a touchdown for the Buccaneers after driving down the field, you got to protect the football, especially against a team like Tampa Bay. If you're making a mistake and turning the ball over, Tom Brady's going to make you pay for it at least once if you're throwing a couple of picks in a game. So if he could protect the football and continue to dominate on the ground the way he does, I think the Eagles fare very well here. Whereas when you look at the Buccaneers, X factors for this team, how many players on this team can you just sit there and list off? So many household name excellent players on the team: Tom Brady, Shaq Barrett, Levante David, the safety Whitehead. There's just so many people you could list off here, and I really don't want to get into each and every one too much because I'd be talking all day just about the entire Buccaneers unit. But the one that really sticks out to me that I think is going to need to have a really big game to make up for some significant losses in the group has got to be wide receiver Mike Evans. Chris Godwin is out with an injury. Brown is no longer on the team. Gronk has been spotty with injuries throughout the year. This is going to be one where Mike Evans needs to be the 1,000-yard, 100-catch receiver that he is. 14 touchdowns this year. He's only had 5 drops on the year. The guy has done literally everything and then some for this team, and he needs to show up and show out and have a big game today and help pick up the slack that's going to be missing in this game. Really unfortunate with the injury with Chris Godwin earlier in the year. And nobody was really expecting the Bucs meltdown. I think not the Bucs meltdown, excuse me, the Antonio Brown meltdown. And nobody was expecting that all to happen. Excuse me, and kind of thin out this receiving corps as quickly as it did. So now with Mike Evans is an all-pro. He's had 8 straight years of 1,000 yards receiving. This is his opportunity to really step up. And, he has been the focal point of this offense in the receiving core for so long now. It's his time. This is where he needs to really step up and be that playmaker for this team. And I think if he has a great game, this Buccaneers offense is going to have a great game, and it's going to really help push them through this playoff match. Now, for some keys to the game and some things that I'm going to be watching and just important stuff and matchups that I think will kind of decide the fate of this game that I have in mind. I have 3 listed here for you guys. The first one has got to be the Eagles' ability to make Tom Brady uncomfortable in this game. I don't think it's really a secret for anybody at this point in his career. 44 years old. The guy's been playing for 22 seasons now, I think is what it is. 22, 23, somewhere along those lines. The only true way to really stop Tom Brady and what he is doing is to make him uncomfortable in the pocket and collapse it as often as possible. That is really the only way any team has ever been successful in stopping Brady. When he's flustered and frustrated and can't, slice and dice the defense and have the time he needs to be able to take a team down, that's the only real time you've ever seen Brady lose those important games. Otherwise, he's just, torched the NFL for 7 Super Bowls and, the rest is history. So with that in mind, I think it is going to be a little bit of a challenge for the Eagles. And the reason I say that is because they have not been super effective in the passing game, on passing, what am I trying to say here? When it comes to defending the pass is what I'm trying to say. They've had some issues, especially when it comes to pressuring the quarterback. Only 155 pressures total on the year. That's actually ranked 20th in the league. So they're just inside that top 20 there. Not really great. And then on top of that, they only have 29 sacks on the year as well, which puts them at second to worst at 31st in the league. With that in mind, on the flip side of things, the Buccaneers, their offensive line has been great at protecting Tom Brady, keeping him upright and keeping pressure away from him and keeping him comfortable for him to do his thing that he does best, sitting in that pocket and dicing up the defenses. They have only allowed 23 sacks on the year, which is number 1 in the league, best in least amount of sacks out of anybody else, any other team in the NFL. So when you combine those 2 metrics together, you look at it, okay, the Eagles are going to have to be on their A game with that pass rush to be able to shut things down. I'm expecting there to be some blitzes. I think very creative, heavy blitzes is typically what does well against Brady if you're able to, keep the coverage in check. Brady's been getting the ball out very, very quickly this year, so that is something that could burn them as well. You're going to need some really good coverage and some very well-disguised blitzing if you're going to be effective in pressuring Brady and making him uncomfortable. So that will be something we're going to have to keep an eye on is, can the Eagles get after him? Because if Brady's just sitting back in the pocket all day, that is not going to go well for this Eagles defense. The second thing that I want to bring up here, and one that I think will kind of determine a little bit of the thing that we were just talking about here and how important all of that is and just how effective this Buccaneers passing game can be, is can the Bucs run the ball effectively with all these heavy winds and the potential of there still being some stormy or residual stormy weather going on during this game. Heavy rains, potential, winds are for sure going to be a thing during this game. If for whatever reason the weather's bad and, the Eagles don't need to rely on this heavy pass rush to get after them and they need to focus on just trying to shut down the run because, the weather's not going to allow the heavy passing game that the Buccaneers are typically accustomed to running, can the Bucs get it done? I don't know. When you look at the numbers, 98.4 rushing yards a game, that's 26th in the league, so a very, very low number compared to the majority of the NFL. However, they do have 18 rushing touchdowns on the ground. They're tied for 9th there. Now, while they're effective with getting the ball in the end zone, like I mentioned, they don't really move the ball a ton on the ground. A lot of those touchdowns have come in the red zone. So when you look at how the Bucs operate, typically it's Tom Brady, slicing and dicing, doing his thing, getting them down the field. And when they get into the red zone, they're no stranger to punching the football in. 14 of those 18 rushing touchdowns came from inside the red zone. So that means they've only had 4 runs that have come from outside of that red zone. So that poses the question, how effective can this running game be, especially when you're going up against an Eagles defense that is actually 9th best in the league in rushing yards a game, allowing only about 108 per game. But on the flip side, have allowed about 18 touchdowns, which is 23rd, tied for 23rd worst in the league. So it's interesting how this kind of flips. Buccaneers are good at getting into the end zone when they're in the red zone, whereas the Eagles are just not good at allowing or preventing teams from getting into the end zone on the ground. But flipping it around, the Eagles are good at preventing mass amounts of yardages being accumulated, whereas the Buccaneers are not necessarily the best at accumulating yardage on the ground. I'm like doing mental gymnastics here as I'm saying that to you guys here, so hopefully you're able to keep up with me on that. But with that in mind, can the Bucs run effectively? That's definitely something I'm going to have to keep an eye on. You know, I don't think we've really seen the playoff Lenny from last year and Ronald Jones being as good as he was last year as well. They've been solid, don't get me wrong, but not quite where they were at when they were on that Super Bowl run. So that is definitely something we'll be keeping an eye on. It is playoff time again. Maybe playoff Lenny comes back and emerges once more to help carry the Buccaneers to another Super Bowl title. Who knows? But I will be keeping an eye on just how well the Buccaneers can run the football, especially if they have to shy away from the passing game, if winds are getting crazy and it's still raining heavily, if the thunderstorms maybe move out, but there's still some heavy rains. That could pose a big issue for the success of this Buccaneers offense. Third point that I have in mind, and this is something that I think a lot of people are wondering, is will the Bucs be able to handle this Eagles ground game? When these two teams met in Week 6, I think Philadelphia was still kind of sorting out exactly what team they were going to be in the year, so it was still kind of early for them to know just exactly what was going on. But since then, they have hit a stride and they have become the best rushing attack in the NFL. Well, they're running into a fairly large stone wall in the Buccaneers defense here, allowing only 92.5 rushing yards a game, 3rd best in the league, and only 11 rushing touchdowns on the entire year, 5th best in the league. The first time these two teams met, Eagles were held to only 100 yards rushing and a couple of touchdowns on the ground. And a lot of the majority of those numbers came in the second half, late in the game, when Philly was kind of making what was nearing a comeback. If Tampa Bay wants to be successful in this game, they're definitely going to have to shut down the run. I feel that the Eagles became far more creative and far better at what they were doing on the ground as they progressed through the year. They definitely started out the year very poorly and were kind of able to battle back when they really started to embrace that ground game and get creative with things. I think Nick Sirianni did a great job. I will say that with all honesty, there were points in the season where I was completely doubting him and I did not think he was getting it done. I'm a Colts fan and I was doubting him. So, that should speak volumes to you guys about just how negatively I was actually looking at him at the time. But I've been able to kind of circle back, look at the body of work and just what he did with the Eagles, especially in that later half of the year. It's very impressive. The ground game has been awesome for Philadelphia. And it's going to be really two battles of Titans just clashing head to head, where you have one of the best run defenses going up against the best running offense. We're in a game that high winds are probably going to be a factor, because the high winds will be there regardless or not. Tampa's run D is going to need to be on their A game and be able to shut down what has been the best rushing attack in the NFL this year for the majority of the year at this point. Only thing I can say is if they shut things down, do not let the Eagles start to make that comeback they did the first time. You don't get lucky twice. Be careful, Tampa Bay. Do not underestimate this running game. Now, a big disadvantage I would like to point out for each team, as I have for everybody else in these playoff previews that I've been doing, is we're basically going to focus on just one area that I think these teams have been struggling the most with recently, or maybe more so through the entire year. It just kind of depends on how you look at it. But the Eagles, the biggest disadvantage I think they have going into this game, and probably my biggest concern about the team, has got to be their passing game. Definitely not one of the best passing attacks in the NFL by a long shot. When you look at the numbers there, passing yards a game, 25th in the league for the Eagles at 200.2 yards a game. They are just above that 200-yard mark. Again, they don't really need it because they've been so dominant in the ground game, but If weather permits, things go fairly well for Tampa Bay. Can this team actually keep up with the Buccaneers if things start to get a little bit out of hand and they need to start throwing the football? I don't know. I really don't know. I love what Jalen Hurts is doing over there. I think it's really exciting. It came out of left field. I don't think a lot of people expected the Eagles offense to kind of turn into what it has and be so effective. But I do have my concerns about him still as a passer. I'm not saying that he is a horrendous passer by any means or anything like that, so Eagles fans don't think I'm just flat out doubting him. I just still have some questions that I would like to see answered in this game. I want to see him in this position be able to dominate through the air, or at least be very effective, not only on the ground, but also in the air going into this game. So the passing game is probably my biggest concern for the Eagles. Whereas when I go to the Buccaneers, similar in idea, but just a little bit different here, my biggest issue and main concern with the Buccaneers is going to be that thin receiving corps right now. They lost Chris Godwin to injury earlier this year. Antonio Brown is gone as well. It's going to be an issue, in my opinion. The first time these two teams met, Antonio Brown was the leading receiver for them. He had a touchdown, 93 yards off of 9 catches. So, the guy was having a really good game. He was averaging 10.3 yards a catch. You take him out, and that severely cuts down the effectiveness of what this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team was the first time these two teams went at it. Couple that with the fact that the Eagles' passing defense definitely came on stronger later in the year, allowing only 220.9 yards per game, which is 11th best in the league. You're not going against any slouch of a passing defense here. The Eagles have been pretty solid in what they were doing, protecting the air and kind of shutting things down. So this is going to be an interesting matchup. I don't know if it's going to be as big of a blowout as some people want to think. I think it could end up being a little bit closer, especially if the weather gets crazy. It's going to affect the effectiveness of this passing game, and I'm a little bit concerned for the Buccaneers, not only just for this game, but throughout the entirety of the playoffs. They did look good just this past week against a very, very depleted and I think just kind of worn out Panthers defense at this point. They were carrying their weight of that team for quite some time, and I think towards the end of the year just kind of cracked, because if your offense is averaging what felt like single-digit points a game for the last handful of weeks, what are you going to do but kind of just like you're going to run out of steam eventually. While they looked good in that game, the Panthers were definitely not a playoff team at that point. I think that the Eagles will fare a little bit better and probably, depending on how this weather thing shakes out, potentially much better than these two teams met the first time. Now, as for my final scores, the over-unders, the stuff that people like to hear about and want to know, my thoughts on the most important things, the Buccaneers and the Eagles. The Bucs are sitting at -8 favorites for this game. Eagles are sitting at +8. And the over-under is at 45.5. This is at the time of me recording this. And to help you guys understand, I'm recording this the night before it goes up. So this is coming up on Friday for you guys, but I recorded this Thursday night. So to help you understand, what do I think about this +8, -8? I definitely think it's possible. It really boils down to how this weather is going to shake things out. I think the weather is going to be a very large deciding factor in this game. Those high winds are going to drastically affect how the Buccaneers play their offense, but I don't really think it's going to affect how the Eagles play theirs, and that's really what's going to boil things down. When I was looking at the weather for it, it says that the storms are earlier in the day, but the winds could potentially persist a little bit later afterwards if the storms kind of remain somewhat close and in the area. The game is at 1 p.m., so it's the early game at that, so there is a strong potential that the rain could be lingering around, or maybe it's going to be gone from the field at that point. Who really knows? Obviously, we're still a handful of days away from Sunday, so nobody has a true idea yet for what the weather is going to look like. With that in mind, do I think -8 is possible for the Buccaneers? Absolutely. Do I think that the Eagles could cover the spread +8? Probably not. I don't really see a scenario where the Eagles win by that much. If the Eagles are getting a win, I see the Eagles winning by like literally 3 points or less, in my opinion. I don't really see the Eagles nearing almost 2-possession lead over the Buccaneers come final score time. I think it'll be something more along the lines of like the Eagles score a last-second rushing touchdown to make it like 24-27 or something like that if all hell breaks loose with these offenses and something crazy happens. With the over-under, we're looking at 45.5. Now, the over-under really, I think, boils down to the weather again, because that's going to affect just how much I think Tampa Bay is going to put up as an offense. And if they're struggling on offense and the Eagles are rolling it on the ground, it could really sway who's going to be like the high score team, who's going to be the low score team, and really kind of affect what the over under looks like. This is one that, like, if you're betting, and this isn't, I'm not giving betting advice, I'm giving my thoughts on this. And like, I guess like if I was in your shoes, you bettors, how would I look at this? This is an over under I'd probably stay away from betting on, because the weather really sways what this is going to look like. Because if the weather's clear, things look good, I could see the Eagles putting up, 2, 3, 4 touchdowns, depending on how things are going for them. And I could see the Buccaneers putting up 3, 4, 5 touchdowns. And then you're way over the over at that point. But if things are ugly, it's messy, it's rainy, and, not a lot of scoring is going on, you're probably sitting well under the under, and both teams barely scratched 35 points. So with that in mind, I wouldn't really necessarily say that there's an easy call for me. I think that weather permitting, it hits the over. Weather not permitting, it hits the under. That's kind of how I look at that. So if you're somebody thinking about betting on the over under, my best advice is look at what the weather says. For my final score and prediction and who I think wins this game in the end, I'm banking on the weather not being as big of a factor, especially by like halftime. I think that it should be cleared out based off of what I'm looking on. Again, this could obviously change come Sunday. But I like the Buccaneers taking the win, and I do have them at 33-21. I think that in Tampa Bay, Buccaneers get the job done. The Philadelphia Eagles, the one thing that kind of is swaying my thoughts on this one is that these Northeastern teams and Northern teams just in general have been having a really hard time playing games in Florida. Philadelphia is not too far from New England and Buffalo and all those places, and everyone seems to be going down south and struggling in Florida for whatever it may be. So with that in mind, I'm going to now not bet against the Floridian teams right now if they're playing in Florida. And I think Tampa Bay gets the W, again, 33-21. But that is my preview for the game. I would love to know what you guys think is going to be the final score in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts on the game, who you're rooting for, what are you excited about, who are you excited to see, and who do you think is going to have a big game. I'll catch you guys in the next game preview. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and have a good weekend, everybody.